Hi guys, thank you very much for joining us today. This is our How to Write a Great Storytelling CV webinar. We'll cover lots of stuff today, so hold on to your seats. Just to let you know, we've got captions active for you. So if you do need captions, that is an option that you have. Let us know if you can't see them. We also have a BSL interpreter, Karen. So we've got the lovely Claire on closed captions and Karen on BSL. We've also got in the background Toby, who's doing all of our technical stuff, and my colleague Rosa, who will, I'm sure, be speaking to you very shortly. So today we are recording the webinar, so we would expect to upload this to the Hive, so you have it for future reference. And this is one of a series of career planning webinars. We do run quite a regular series of webinars. You can find out all about those on our events page. Please do submit questions at any point during the session. We'll usually save them to the end, but if we see anything that we think is super relevant, we'll pick it up as we go through. Please do have a chat with us in the chat box as well, and have a chat with each other. A huge amount of learning is what you learn from the other people in the room, and because we're not all physically together, the chat box can be a really useful tool for that. Toby, next slide, please. So what can you expect to learn from the session today? So we'll be talking a lot about the narrative CV. At the end, we would expect you to understand what a narrative CV is and what the benefits are of using one. Humans function on story. So from time immemorial, from before we started recording written word, we were telling stories to each other. It's something, a structure that is naturally accessible to most people. And it's something that's easy to think to turn around your thoughts on when it comes to writing your CV, instead of having it as a cold, stale document, thinking about it as your life story. You'll also know the value of tailoring your CV to every job vacancy, because you can't just have a standard CV that you send out. It has to be relevant to the job, and we'll talk about that. There are ways to talk about your skills and achievements that will help you stand out from the crowd. And we'll also look at being able to storify your accomplishments. What do we mean by that? We mean using your accomplishment as story. So having a beginning and a middle and end, and engagement. You're the hero. This is your story. And you are trying to share it with others so that you can get in on their story, and together you can move forward and write a new story. So we're going to start with a poll. Toby, next slide, please. So have a chat with us now. What barriers are you up against when it comes to your CV? We're going to share a poll with you. I'd appreciate it if you could have a look at that. I'll read out the answers as well, and answer as you see fit. So your answers to what barriers you're up against might be, I don't have a CV and I don't know where to start. It might be, I know there are different formats of CV, but I don't know how to identify and which one to choose. It might be, bear with me for a second, I'm just going to make my screen a bit bigger. There we go. I don't know how to identify my experience and skills or write about them. I don't know how to write an effective professional profile. There's a gap in my work history and I don't know how to address it. I have a CV and submit it to jobs, but I'm not getting interviews. Or I don't believe anyone will employ me even if I have the best CV in the world. And if you think more than one of those answers applies, you can tick that box. Rosa, shall we have a little chat while people are answering the poll question? And actually, shall we see what we've got in the chat box? Have we got anyone here? Hi, Lawrence. Welcome. Rosa, what barriers have you experienced when it comes to writing your CV?
Oh my goodness, lots of barriers. Writing a CV can be very daunting and overwhelming, right, Tammy?
Yeah.
It's not like writing a normal document. It's really unusual, and you've only got 1 to 2 pages to demonstrate, what value you offer to the employer, why you're interested in the role, etc. So I've always found it really, really, really difficult to, write that 1 or 2 pager, and also almost where to start, how to sell my strengths and my unique talents. And I often find, let's be honest, writing a CV, I can find it quite a boring exercise. And so I'm always trying to find ways in which to motivate myself to get into that CV writing. And so I think today what we're endeavoring to do, everyone, is to really get you to rethink how you approach writing a CV. And so we're getting you to actually use your imagination and your creative skills to help you really demonstrate your strengths and your talents and how you can add value to your future employer, right, Tammy?
Yeah, exactly. Very much so.
How are we going with the results? Is anything coming through at the moment?
It looks like there's a little bit issue with the poll. I'm really sorry. Let me just try again.
Okay.
No problem.
Relaunch poll.
If there is, I'm going to make a suggestion. Why not write into the chat box?
Yeah.
See there the bullet points. Perhaps the barriers you're faced is not up there. Share with us what those barriers are. Is it that you've identified you may not have the right skills or talents, you don't know where to start, you find it an overwhelming and daunting experience? So, if we're having issues with the poll, Toby, I'm going to suggest that people actually type into the chat box and then we can look at that. But Tammy, let me ask you, what were the barriers that you faced?
I think that I've actually faced all of these barriers at some point.
Yeah.
I think the most recent one is that I've had a gap in my work history. And I really did think that having a gap in my work history was going to be the end of the world, that no employer was ever going to employ me. I'd had 3 years out of work and I hadn't been well. But actually, the reality was I've had 2 jobs since I had that break. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're out of the game. It just means that you have to figure out how to express it on your CV as part of your story. And the reality is a lot of people do have to take career breaks for a variety of reasons. Some people choose to, some people are forced to. Life isn't linear.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. I know that we're going to be coming to it later, but do we need to express that gap on our CV, or should we wait to be asked? Because that's an interesting one, isn't it?
I think it's always better to not leave recruiters or employers making assumptions. So if you have a gap in the dates that you were working, they will naturally assume that you weren't working and they will make up reasons why that is. Whereas if you address it and say, actually, during this time I was working on my health, but I was also, you will have other stuff that maybe you were able to do, even if you weren't able to hold down a job at that time. You might have done a bit of volunteering, or you might even have just been doing some short courses and working up on some skills. There are ways to fill that gap without it looking like a chasm. It is a gap and not a chasm.
Yeah, great. I can see some stuff in the chat. Lawrence, thanks a mil. Have a CV, but not getting the jobs. Okay, so what we want to do is, tell me, what do you think of that question as a that barrier?
I think realistically that it sounds like there has been some rejection in there. There's a bit of self-doubt. It depends obviously on what job you're trying to get, who you're trying to apply with, how, your skills, whether your interview and application skills need to be brushed up. And actually it might be worth, if Lawrence isn't already one of our candidates, for him to ask for help from the coaches, which you can do from the Evenbreak Hive, because it might be that you need a bit more help, not just with your CV, but also with everything else that surrounds recruitment and applications.
Okay, I think we have some results in, Tammy.
We do have some results in. We do. Thankfully, none of you said you didn't have a CV and didn't know where to start. That's good. So everyone's got something. We're just improving what we already have. 10% of you said, I know there are different formats of CV, but I don't know which one to choose. We will talk a little bit about the formats of the CVs. We're focusing on the type of CV, so the narrative format, but the shape and the structure of CVs, there are sort of 3 main ones, which we'll come to later on. We do also have another CV recording, webinar recording on the Hive that goes into those in more depth. There's also resources on the Hive that are written that you can go through, and there are some templates there for you to use as well. 10% of you said, I don't know how to identify my experience and skills or write about them. We will cover that today. So we will talk about how you can identify your skills and your experience. We'll talk about how to storify you and tell your story as the hero. So that's what we'll focus on today. So we'll have something for you on that. 20% of you have said, I don't know how to write an effective professional profile. Again, that's something we'll cover today. You're in the right place. We're going to talk a lot about professional profiles because that's your hook. That's your how you draw the recruiter in. And also there's more resources on the Hive for you to read afterwards if you need a bit more help. 20% of you have said there's a gap in my work history and I don't know how to address it. We will talk about gaps coming up. And again, if you struggle at any point with how to fill a gap, then ask to see one of the coaches. I realised I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Tammy. I'm one of the Evenbreak coaches. 10% of you said I have a CV and submitted to jobs, but I'm not getting interviews. That's quite common and there can be a lot of reasons for it. It's not necessarily all you, it's not necessarily all them. We'll talk about common errors on CVs in the process of going through the webinar. You might also need a CV review. So again, maybe get in contact with the coaches if you need some extra help. And thankfully, and this is good, I'm pleased about this, no one said, I don't believe anyone will employ me even if I have the best CV in the world. That's really good.
Yeah,
that's really good. So we've got confident people in the room are like that. Although we have got 30% of you saying more than one of the other answers. So let's see what we can do about fixing that. Toby, next slide, please. Rosa, over to you.
Thank you, Tammy. Again, I just want to say, please feel free to share your stories in the chat box, about your journey when it comes to writing your CV. That's been very, very informative. So thanks a lot. Rightio. So let's get started. What the heck is a narrative CV? Anybody know? Feel free to put it in the chat box. What do you think a narrative CV is? Well, a narrative CV, right, Tommy, it's otherwise known as a storytelling CV or a story-focused CV. And what we're wanting to do today is to get you to reframe your approach on how you build and create your CV, because it can be a really overwhelming prospect. And so we want you to use your creativity and your imagination, because we've all got creativity. Creative skills and the imagination. So let's look at this. So a narrative CV is really a way of storytelling your career journey. So it's a story-focused CV. It does have similar elements, right, to a traditional CV. So we've got a header. We use 1 to 2 pages, right, Tammy? And we also need to use our CV to describe our personal and our professional attributes, talents, and strengths. But it's a creative alternative to a traditional CV. So what are the differences? Well, you are narrating your professional journey. It is usually told in a third person. So you get the opportunity to amplify your strengths and your achievements by storifying them. Now, you are the hero, as Tommy mentioned earlier. You're the protagonist of your story. So we all love a good story, right? It's attention grabbing. So if you're the hero or shero or protagonist of your career story, what's the problem you've solved? How have you solved it? And what results have you got? So it's designed to catch the attention of a recruiter or a HR professional or an employer. It's definitely more dynamic and it's more engaging than a traditional format. You can explore your career story by making it easier to demonstrate and show your achievements by being just slightly a little more creative. Now, you can, for example, there's a number of ways in which you can storify your strengths and your talents, and we're going to talk to that a little bit later. But this is great for the creative sector or for creative people. But guess what, guys? The principles of writing a narrative CV or a storytelling CV can apply across all industry sectors, right, Tammy?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so it adds more context, personalization, and it gives character in terms of it demonstrates your ability to be creative and to think outside the box. And as we've mentioned earlier, it's attention grabbing. And we know that recruiters and employers spend anywhere up to 7 seconds sifting through a CV if they're not using a bot. So this is really what a narrative CV is. It's an alternative, creative approach to writing your CV. Toby, next slide.
So we've talked a bit about what it is and what's important to do while you're developing it. And one of the things that's important to do is choose your stories well. So when you're looking to apply for a job, the job description, the advertisement, the person specification, they are all really important. Not all jobs will have quite as much structure as a person specification and a job description, but most of them will. And what's really important is that you cover the essential criteria and as many of the desirable criteria as you can. If you have similar experience to what they're asking for, but it doesn't quite match, you can make the connection for the recruiter, because what they have to see is what the value is that you're bringing to the business. And it sometimes is quite opaque for them to marry up what you've done before to something that you're applying to. And so if you are, for instance, have experience in customer service, it's the skills that you have in customer service that you're transferring. It doesn't kind of matter what environment they were in, but different environments have different ways of phrasing things. And sometimes you might have to make that connection for the employer or the recruiter. Dropping in keywords from the job description to your CV, it's definitely worth doing, particularly if you're applying via a system that uses automatic scanning. So if you're doing ATS CVs, actually keywords can be really important, because the ATS scanner is looking for relevant words and matching them up against what they've got in the job description. Be honest and accurate. Be honest and accurate with that. You're looking at highlighting your success stories via your achievements. That's key to how you're thinking about this as a story. And again, the hiring manager is a person who is naturally attuned to story. Emulate the language used in the job description. So again, that's similar to using keywords. And also, most people have made a huge impact in their jobs. And on a day-to-day basis, you maybe don't realise. It's not until you reflect on that afterwards that you realise you've actually made quite a big change, quite a big impact. And we'll cover a couple of my examples of impact further on, and one of Rosa's as well. So think about problems that you've solved. The success of the story is relevant. So again, if you're thinking about stories and narratives, beginning, middle and end, that success happens at the end. In novel terms, we call it a denouement. So the little bit at the end, the little tail at the end that's comfortable and makes everyone happy. That's your happy ending. So the other thing you can do to keep yourself focused is have a long CV with loads of examples in. And you know that you have to cut your CV down to 2 pages. But if you've got all of the examples written, you don't have to keep rewriting them. So if you've got a long CV with all of your examples, that can be really helpful. If you prefer, excuse me, you can also have a CV that's tailored to particular industries. So if you've got enough experience that, say, for instance, so I have a degree in creative writing, I do a lot of writing, I'm interested in that arena. So I have a CV that's writing based, and I have a CV that's careers based. If I wanted to, I could also have a CV that was leadership and management based or admin based. So you can choose to have different CVs for different types of job also. Toby, next slide, please.
Okay, so this is how to craft a CV that tells a story, the standout summary. We all know what that is, right? There's essentially 2 sections on your CV that allows you to share your career story. It's the professional profile or career summary, and also the work section of your CV. So Tammy and I are going to spend a little bit of time showing you how you can share that story across these 2 sections of your CV. So first of all, what is a professional profile or summary? Well, we know it's that short, concise blurb of information that sits under your name and your contact details, just above the skills or the work section of your CV, right? So you want to create an eye-catching headline. So think of it as your headline. As Tommy mentioned earlier, it's framing the rest of your CV. And because CVs and recruiters are only spending 7 seconds looking at your CV, if they're not using that you know, that bot. You want to make sure it's impactful and compelling. It's almost like a mini story. So think of it as an eye-catching headline. It needs to be short, concise, and make an impact. We recommend no more than 6 sentences in order to share your story. So we wanted you to think about almost equally like it's a personal brand, right? So it should act like the cover of a really good story or book. So why not start with your role and experience? Describe your title, the number of years of experience that you've had. You always want to lead with that hero active word. Why not describe 2 character traits? Make sure that those character traits are authentic to who you are. You should tell the employer what your value is, your talents, your strengths. Can be funny, but try and make it as eye-catching as you can. So in order to start a summary or a professional profile, Tammy's going to demonstrate and show you some examples. But just quickly, why not use the basic elements of storytelling, right? So you want to have a setting, a conflict, and a resolution. So how do you do it? Summarize your work experience, your skills, your values. Use one really compelling achievement or problem that you've solved. Remember, you are the hero and the protagonist of the story. You can present it as a paragraph. Remember, 6 sentences. Maybe you want to write it as a bullet list, or why not be even more creative and do a combination of both. So use sentences, and why not use bullet points, right? Next slide. Thanks.
So here is an example of me. This is my example. And you'll note that there are actually 2 character traits here, and we're calling this is a weaker example. This is a weaker example. And although there are 2 character traits there, hardworking and reliable, those are very commonly read by recruiters. They will see those a lot. And honestly, employers expect you to be those things by default. So what you might want to say instead, and I will come to a good example later on, is I might have said things like, I'm innovative, I am resilient, I am high achieving. That's even a little bit worn. But there are some phrases that a recruiter will see over and over again. So things like detail oriented, strong interpersonal and IT skills, able to work on own initiative, that don't allow you to stand out. So again, your story, it's you. Tell them who you are. That's your opportunity with this particular part of the CV. This is your who. This is the who you are. So the weak example in particular is, I'm a hardworking, reliable and enthusiastic person with a broad range of experience in admin, recruitment and coaching. Detail-oriented with strong interpersonal and IT skills. A good team player who is dedicated and able to use own initiative to achieve personal company goals. Flexible and learns new skills.
I'm sorry,
quickly.
Tammy, you're reading that far too fast.
Sorry, too fast. No worries. Where did we get to?
I'm hardworking.
I'm hardworking. Okay, so I am a hardworking, reliable and enthusiastic person with a broad range of experience in admin, recruitment and coaching. Detail-oriented with strong interpersonal and IT skills. A good team player who is dedicated and able to use own initiative to achieve personal and company goals. Flexible and learns new skills quickly. Toby, next slide, please. So if we're saying that that isn't the strongest example, and it isn't, then what would make it stronger? To start you off, we actually have a formula that you can use, and I'll show you this in practice shortly. And the formula is to start with an adjective, follow with a noun, and we'll go on from there. So it's adjective, noun with number, years of experience in special skill. That special skill is the bit that's unique to you. That's one of your unique selling points. An ability to relevant skills. So they're your second and third skills, best skills, and a strong background in relevant contexts in which you have worked. So for instance, you might have those experience, again, customer services, you might have those skills in financial services, you might have had those skills from building, we never know. seeks a position as relevant objective. And the relevant objective is what you want to achieve, which should be the job title. It should be the thing that you're applying for. And that's one of the very first things that you tailor is this part here. So what does it look like in practice? Toby, next slide, please. So in practice, I think I might have 7 sentences here, so I might be cheating just a touch. A strong professional summary would be inspirational career coach and trainer with over 10 years experience in medical education and recruitment.
I'm sorry, Tammy.
Sorry,
again,
too fast
it's
again.
too fast.
Inspirational career coach and trainer with over 10 years experience in medical education and recruitment. Improving the lives of over 50 clients in 4 months. I use innovation to help clients move forward on their career pathway. Working mostly with disabled clients and with a strong belief in person-centered coaching, I bring empathy, pragmatism, and drive to the one-to-one coaching space. As well as telling you about what I can do, that tells you a bit about my values. So I've got empathy and pragmatism and drive. It tells you about the things that are important to me, helping people, because I use the word helping quite a lot and working with. There's quite a lot that says in terms of story that isn't in that first paragraph. Toby, next slide, please.
And Tommy, I really like that because that's a really concise way of sharing your story. It's packed full of really, strong action words. You've demonstrated how you solved a problem. So guys, think about that formula. Refer to that article in the Hive because we do have an article there that helps you write your professional summary, a dedicated article. And using that structure gives you the format, because it can be really difficult, right, Tammy, to write those 6 sentences.
Yeah.
It's a little short story that needs to demonstrate and be compelling and show how you add value to that future employer. So that format that Tammy's just demonstrated can be really, really useful. Okay, so how to craft a CV that tells a story, storifying your skills, strengths, talents. I'm keen to know, how do you do that at the moment? Please share it in the chat box how you are able to craft and demonstrate to an employer what your unique value is, what your talents and strengths are. We'd love to know. So please do share that with us. Okay, so when it comes to crafting a CV that tells your story and you want to storify your skills, you want to think about this section as an opportunity for you to share your impact in your previous workplace, or maybe it was in a volunteering job. You want to demonstrate the effects and the impact that you've made in previous jobs or roles or in your career to date. So you might want to consider a little bit of reflection, reflect and explore on your work history. Now, you've developed hundreds of work history stories and experiences, right, Tammy?
Yep, absolutely. More than you can even remember.
So you want to share that. That still does take a little bit of time to rethink and remember what those stories were, because sometimes we're often doing more that's in our job description, right? And all of those memories are locked away, and we need to be able to bring those memories back. And often simple brainstorming can help support you remember some of those amazing successful stories and experiences where you've been a hero, you've solved a problem, and you've got incredible results, not just for the organization, but for yourself. Tell me, what about asking for feedback? How important is that?
It's really important. It's really important because they help fill in the gaps, actually, for the things that you don't remember or the things that you didn't particularly think were big achievements. So the things you didn't notice you were doing. People have a tendency to do and not stop and think about the 700 skills that they have at any one time. So it can be really helpful to ask other people, particularly if they're able to give you details that you don't remember. Ask what you did well. think about asking them to tell you about how you achieved the thing you did. So what did you do? How did you achieve it? What did they observe you doing while you were working? Or if it's a volunteering experience, from volunteering, because those are experiences you can draw from too. And even in home life, if there are things that you do that people observe that you're good at, experiences that you have, draw those in, get all of the detail that you can from those. It helps from a confidence perspective, because you think to yourself, oh, actually, I can do this. And it helps you to remember your work history. And for many people, they are very experienced, and you can't remember it all. There's just so much going on that you can't get to the end of it. How about being modest? Do you think you're a modest person? Modesty is a nice trait, but don't be modest on your CV. Make sure that the potential employer knows how good you are. So you have to be able to convince them. Be confident when you approach writing your CV. State your experiences as they were. State your stories as you experienced them. You did well. You did well. And how do you transfer those skills? You don't have to have got them from the same sector. So as I mentioned before, you might want to say you might be wanting to do customer service, but you're used to doing it in retail. Actually, you'd quite like to go into call center work, or you'd like to do customer service on a more senior level, perhaps transferring some of those skills into sales. So there are some crossover skills between, say, customer service and sales. You don't have to have learned everything in the same sector, but there is a skill that will help you to transfer them over, and that's looking at the entire job that you did, the entire bit of work that you did, and thinking about all of the skills that you used while you were making that achievement, while you were hitting that goal. There are also lots of applications online that can help you identify your skills, because as I mentioned before, half jokingly, you do have 600 to 700 skills that you don't know you have. So you might be able to name 10, but really you have loads. And so those tools can help you to identify what sort of skills you have and how you might transfer them into other areas.
I love that, Tammy, because that's like, transferable stories,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
One story can turn into another, and it's exactly what you should think about in terms of your skills. Just because you've worked in a different workplace or industry sector doesn't mean that you have been using similar skills that you can take into your future role, right? Mm-hmm. It's really interesting because Jake has asked the question, how are you supposed to describe your work experience if nobody will give you the chance to gain the experience the employer is looking for? And I think, Tammy, you've brought attention to the whole area of volunteering, getting experience through volunteering, right? It's still an opportunity to be able to build your story.
It is. The only danger with volunteering is that it can be, you can't volunteer forever. So volunteering has to be two things. It has to work for both you and the organisation you're volunteering for. You have to be supported by the organisation, and ideally, given the option to choose the sorts of things you're doing, or to work towards particular goals within volunteering. Good volunteering placements do that. There might be a lot of negotiation involved, but sometimes that can work. And because they have different pressures to employers, they sometimes are able to make that time to support you in a different way, or to give you opportunities to shadow someone else within the organisation. There's lots of opportunities. Sometimes you just have to negotiate for them.
Absolutely. And there's also the opportunity to build your skills through courses, right? So Jake, there's lots of other ways than just the linear way of thinking, I need a job to build skills. Collaborations with others, interests and hobbies. You're building skills every day of your life through the different experiences that you're living. But it can also be through those courses and those qualifications. You're building knowledge, and you're also developing new skills as well as enhancing, existing skills. So we hope that helps. Lawrence again has said, and Lawrence has been really interactive today. Thanks, Lawrence. Examples that I've done when I have worked or explained what I am like working with other people or researching on info I am interested in, like gaming and motorsport. And we know there's a lot of creative skills that you're using, Lawrence, when you are even gaming. You're being a critical thinker, you're working strategically. Think of all those dexterity skills that you are using. You're problem solving. You're definitely being a hero when you're playing those games. So you want to think creatively about how you are developing and building those skills. I know that we've got here, we talk about reflective best self. And somebody else has said, Tammy, I find it really difficult to be able to identify my strengths. And I love the fact that with a reflective best self activity, if you're really struggling or you've got a block to identify those skills and how to storify them, as Tammy mentioned, reach out to another and ask them. Could be something as simple as, can you describe a time when I was at my best and how, why?
What was I doing?
Exactly. Give them an opportunity to write one simple paragraph that provides an example of how you've solved a problem, what skills that you've used, and how you've been a hero. You can get really creative with it. So, Toby, next slide. Okay, so this is how to craft a CV that tells a story, demonstrating those achievements, those strengths, those talents. Folks, how do you do that in your current CV writing? How are you demonstrating your value to an employer? How are you storifying your skills, your strengths, and your talents? What's making you unique? We'd be really keen, right, Tammy, to understand how you demonstrate this across the work section of your CV. Now, here's the thing. Employers are interested in three key things, right? Why you want the job, why you want their job, right? Why you want to work for them. Can you do the job? And how can you deliver impact or value? So those are the three things you want to think about when you are crafting your skills and your talents and your strengths. So the work section is a key area where you can storify those talents and those skills. You want to use this section to share your impact in the workplace and the effects that you've made through and the impact that you've made throughout your career, right? Now, usually in a narrative CV, you're writing a paragraph. However, we are using a narrative CV, but also suggesting that you should try something a little different. You can still cherry pick and use those bullet points because they're really, really, really effective way of being concise and getting your story across to your employer or your recruiter, right? So use those bullet points and abridged language. So first of all, in the work section, you want to set the scene. What problem are you solving? Remember, you're that hero. How did you solve that problem? We highly recommend that you don't just put in your responsibilities or tasks. You need to demonstrate your achievements and your results. So I want you to actually step into the world of being your own hero and imagine, what was that problem you solved with that employer? What impact did you make? What positive feedback did you get? What big change were you making? So set the scene by starting with action words. Action words are very, very transformative. They're a dynamic and positive way to help you focus on your story. It makes for a much more compelling read, and it also keeps the word count down, and you're starting off with something very strong and transformative. So remember, as you're the hero, you want to show how you solved a problem. Why not try the POWER technique, which stands for problem, action, and result? So here's a quick formula, and then Tammy's going to develop that further. Start with I, or action word, so transformed. Think about the achievement that you've made. And then follow that with the result. So what did that achievement lead to? You want to quantify it with something that's measurable. So Tammy's going to step us through how we can actually do that in the next slide.
Okay. Brilliant. So just to keep that formula foremost in your mind, it's there at the top of the slide again. It's I, action word, achievement, which led to quantifiable outcome. It's important to note that not all outcomes will be quantifiable. Quantifiable ones are easier for recruiters to see and to comprehend immediately. But if you have a qualitative outcome, that is okay too. But if you can not massage it into a number, but if there is a number to be gained for it, then quantifiable outcomes can be useful. So one example is composed, that's our action word. So composed a Twitter communication strategy, that's our achievement, which led to 167% uptake in followers. That's the quantifiable outcome. And then second example, reinvented our specialty champion scheme, which made it easier to register, created a simple online form, sent regular updates to volunteers to keep them engaged, resulted in a 200% increase in engaged champions. So twice as many engaged champions as we'd had before. Third example is turned, that's the action word, turned around CS department by reorganizing the service desk and training all associates within 3 months. And the result was that the store won awards for customer service and ratings improved by 50%. So while you're working through all of these examples in your mind and coming up with your stories, these are all helpful when it comes to interview as well. So as you're going through them and you're picking the best ones, save some for interview. You want to get to interview. That's the whole point of the CV. But you also need to be able to talk about some new things at interview. And when you go through your stories this way and start phrasing them in ways that you can look at and go, oh, wow, actually, I can see my achievements, then that empowers you also for the job interview itself. Toby, next slide, please.
Okay, addressing gaps. This was asked earlier. This was asked by a few people, I think, and it came quite high up on the poll. I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on addressing gaps? Because I know that you're a believer that it's okay to address it on the CV. So how do we craft that story or address those gaps on the CV? What are your thoughts on that?
So for me, I think it is important to address gaps, and gaps do happen for all sorts of reasons. So mine was ill health. So I actually addressed it as a career break to improve health and get back to the place where I could work. So I obviously phrased it slightly more, slightly better than that. But that sort of talking about it as this is a stop gap. This is not a permanent position. I have taken a career break to work on my health, improve my health, with an aim to getting back into work. So it is about saying, in my case, it was ill health. 3 years is quite a long time, but there are people who have longer gaps than that. But it shows that I was also working towards getting back to work. Also, I did some volunteering in that time. So all of that went on my CV. I also was doing training at that time. I undertook a level 2 qualification. So that was all stuff I was doing to keep myself abreast of what was happening in my industry. If given the opportunity at things like interview or on my CV, then I might also say I've maintained membership of professional organisations in my case, and I've kept abreast of changes. I'm on newsletter, email outs and things like that. So there's lots of things you can do to show that you're ready to come back to work if you've had a break, and to think about, showing it as a thing that's happened. Because being born also happened, going to school happened. We talk about going to school. All sorts of things happen in your past. This is a thing that's happened. You're ready to move on from it.
Brilliant, Tammy. I really, really love the fact that you've shared that story. That's a really personal story. And, guys, Tammy is right. Tammy got to take control of her story. She got to tell that story as she wanted. And how she chose. Now, it may or may not be for everyone. Some people may not want to share that story on their CV, and that's your choice. You've got the right to do that. But It's right, Tommy, because, recruiters or employers may ask that question even prior to interview or actually at interview stage. So it is something that we're going to have to tackle anyway, right? Addressing the gap.
Definitely.
But how you phrase it, how you want to address that story is really up to you. But also, don't forget that through our adversity and our challenges, etc., we are developing grit, determination, resilience, and we're growing. So even right there, you're developing your skills. So it really comes down to how you want to deliver or express or articulate that particular story when it comes to addressing your gaps. Now, feel free again to use the chat box. Tell us how you feel you might want to address those gaps. Okay, so as Tammy said, don't be afraid to address the gaps. You don't have to describe what happened in great detail. You can give broad general strokes. Remember, you are in control of your narrative. You get to choose and decide how you want to express that. And that's really important, right, Tammy?
Yeah, definitely. It's your story. Nobody lives your story except you. And how you present that story to them is important, because actually it tells them a lot about you too.
Yeah.
So for instance, putting things down the way I suggested earlier shows you resilient. You go, okay, this has happened, but now I'm ready to move forward.
Absolutely.
There's subtext. Since we're talking about narratives, there's subtext to what you're saying in that kind of instance.
Exactly. I love the fact that you were continuously learning, even in that gap, even in that time out, Tammy. And I love the way you expressed that story and you shared that experience with us. So let's move on to the next slide.
Okay,
to include or not to include? That is the question, Tammy.
Here's the question, and it's a big question. There are lots of myths out there. So again, we were talking about narratives. Let's talk about myths. Things that you must and mustn't include on CVs. Things that if you will just get chucked in the bin if you don't have on there. So let's go through them. Let's have a talk about what to include and what not to include. So things like hobbies and interests. So you don't really need necessarily a hobbies and interests section on the CV anymore. But if you're able to draw out anything from your hobbies and interests, as we've mentioned before with things like gaming, it's definitely worth including them. So they can be included as stories, things that you've learned. Work history more than 10 years old. It depends. So it depends when your last work history was. If you find that you've got a lot of experience and your CV is overcrowded and you're finding it difficult to find stories to include, then it's okay to go back sort of 10 years and go, okay, well, I don't need to include the previous 10 years because in 10 years you'll have progressed quite a lot. Also, it does tend to show you are at least a certain age, which isn't necessarily a problem, but discrimination, as we know, in all kinds of areas is a thing that happens. So taking out the opportunity for anyone to have this to perform discriminatory acts against you is best. So you feel free to remove anything that's more than 10 years old, especially if you have a gap that is less than 10 years. If you have a gap that's 10 years or more, then you probably do need to include that older stuff. Secondary school qualifications. Include these if they are your highest level of education. If you have a higher level of education, so you might have a degree or A levels, then include those. But you don't have to include your secondary school qualifications unless they are your highest level of qualification. Disability and impairments, you don't have to include these. You can include these if you want to. So what I mean by that is, if you, and people do, disabled people learn ways to adapt. We adapt every day in ways that we don't think about because humans are incredibly adaptable. If you have skills that you've learned from dealing with your disability or the disabling attitudes of others, then those can definitely go on the CV. You don't have to disclose. You can if you want to. It's a choice that you make. Again, it's your story. That part's really important. Age doesn't need to go on your CV. There's not really any reason for them to ask for your age. There might be some acting roles and things like that where they need an age range, but for the vast majority of jobs, they don't need to know how old you are. They also don't need to know about your marriage status or dependents. They don't need to know if you have anyone that you care for. Again, if you have skills that you've learned from caring, then include those. If you've learned skills from marriage, include those. But you don't have to actually make any statements about it. That's your choice. You don't have to include a photo. If you are asked during the recruitment process for a photo, that's a little bit more difficult, but generally speaking, with a CV, no photo. That's the UK general consensus on photos. Date of birth, again, you don't need that on a CV. And the difficult thing with a lot of online application processes now is so things like Total Jobs is you upload your CV and it's not public, but it's a risk. So maybe don't include your date of birth, not only because it gives people the opportunity to be biased against you, but also because if there's a data breach, your date of birth and your name and your address and all those things could be out there. I'll come to address in a second. Your home address. You actually don't need to include that on your CV. Most recruiters don't post you stuff anymore. Have your phone number, unless you can't use the phone, and then it might be worth, if you have text, then saying text only next to that, and have an email address. But that's the primary way a recruiter or an employer will contact you. Home address isn't necessary. It'll only need to be collected when you've actually been offered a job. And references. So it's a good idea to say that you have references and that they're available on request, but don't put the contact details for your references in the CV. And the reason for that being, you might need to contact them first to tell them that they have been selected. Would they mind giving you a reference? But also you don't want the recruiter contacting your references before you're ready to give them, because you really want to have gone through an interview and been offered a job before you go around handing out your referees. Toby, next slide, please. So common pitfalls to CVs. What happens a lot that makes you difficult to see amongst all the others? So your CV shouldn't be longer than 2 pages. There are a few tiny exceptions to that. They're mostly around academic CVs, doctors, writers' CVs. Sometimes they'll have a list of the articles, books, etc. that they've written. Generally speaking, 2 pages is plenty on a CV. Poor grammar and spelling is another problem. If you are applying for a bread role instead of a job role, so if you're spelling it R-O-L-L instead of R-O-L-E, that's an error. If you're not sure about your grammar and spelling, ask someone else to have a look at it for you before you submit it, and make sure that you use all the electronic help that there is out there. So Microsoft Word has editor and things like that. Inconsistent formatting can be a problem. So if you're using bullet points, but they don't all line up, that can be distracting. Or if you've got paragraphs that are all over the place, that can also be distracting. So again, there's no such thing as perfect, but getting your CV as perfect as you can possibly get it helps to get it seen. And on that note, actually, tables can be a problem. So if you're formatting using tables in your CV, a lot of ATS systems will strip that part out of the CV completely. So what the ATS system will assess is the half of your CV that it can see and not some of the really important bits. So avoid using tables in your CV pretty much at all costs. We talked a bit before about using tired phrases like hard worker or willing to learn new skills in a CV, particularly in a professional profile. Try and think out of the box, be imaginative. Who are you? You're all of those things, but you're also other things. Don't undersell yourself on your CV. You can do this. You are going to be an asset to somebody. You will have skills that somebody else doesn't have. At the same time, don't oversell yourself. Recruiters are very sensitive to being oversold. They will see you coming. So, and likewise, don't lie on your CV. Lying on your CV in some places can actually get you fired if you're discovered. So keep it honest, but be true to yourself. Not addressing gaps in your work history. We've talked a bit about how you can address gaps in your work history. And also, you should front load all of the most interesting and relevant things about you. So again, that professional statement, your most recent roles or your top skills to the top front page of your CV, because that's where it's going to catch the most attention. I've often seen CVs that where people they've earned awards and they've done really well at something, and it's on the last page of their CV at the bottom under their hobbies. it needs to go much higher than that, because that is something you should be proud of. It should be front and center. It is a big achievement. And also the last of the common pitfalls in this list is not tailoring your CV for every role. So if you don't tailor your CV, you're not showing an employer that you've read the guidance, you aren't showing them that you're really interested in the role, you haven't really shown them that you know what the role is about. And so not tailoring just shows that you're not interested to a recruiter, and that CV will go in the bin. So on to CV layouts. Next slide, please, Toby. So there are three main layouts for CVs. So I know that we did have a question about CVs, and those are chronological, which means that you have your professional statement, you have your jobs then in the order that they happened. So you go into your jobs straight away, talk about your most recent experience first. You then go through other headings. There are there are templates on the Hive that are worth checking out that will help you with this part. Skills-based, or the functional CV, which is really quite useful for people who are changing into a new sector. It's useful for people who have maybe been out of work for a while, and the skills-based CV prioritizes your key skills. So you have maybe 6 or 7, or you might have 6 or 7 key skills, or you might have 3 groups of key skills that are your selling point, your key selling point, because you've got lots of experience from all over, but you need to bring it together. And that's what you want them to see first when they're recruiting. And then the third is the combination or hybrid CV. So the hybrid CV is a little bit of both, and that provides a brief spotlight on skills. So again, that might be your top 4 or 5 skills, and then talks more to the work section. So you're again chronological order, and then going on to the back page and looking at your references and your education and training and things like that. Again, just to repeat, we do have templates for all these on the Hive, and there is a document on there that goes into which one might be best for you in more detail. Toby, next slide, please. So cover letters. If your CV is the who, what, where, and why, or sorry, the who, what, where, and when, then the cover letter is why you. So you've talked a lot about your story, you've explained your story, you've shown them your story, but most recruitment processes will have a space for you to have a cover letter, and that's when you tell them why you want to work there. So why you want to work there, what you want to help them achieve, what attracts you to the role, and a bit about what you've got. Don't repeat anything that's already on your CV. So this is new space to talk about you. And cover letters can sometimes take different forms. So now they're not always called a cover letter. You might be asked to provide a 250-word statement. Treat it like a cover letter. It's the same thing. And make sure that you're storifying your talents when it comes to your cover letter. So it's 3 paragraphs. Why are you interested in the job? Why are you a good fit for that role? And a demonstration of your achievements. But remember the storytelling techniques that we've talked about throughout, and the problem solving. What problem are you going to solve for the employer? So you know about the employer, why are you interested, why are you a good fit? You've got a skill that will help them fix a problem. That's why you're a good fit for the role.
Tammy, can I just add to that? I think, that first paragraph, Tammy is so spot on, right? Not only have we got an opportunity to amplify and share our compelling story of our talents and our strengths, etc., it's really important to learn about your future employer story. So do your research, find out who is this organization, what are they offering, do their values align with mine? And you want to let them know that you actually know their story. So in your first paragraph, you want to demonstrate how, what you know about them, why you're interested in that role and their particular organization. So actually researching and listening to their story is really important as well, right, Tammy?
Absolutely, yeah, because if you want to work there, you should know about the organisation. And there's lots of places that you can look actually that will help you out. So glassdoor.co.uk is a place you can find out what it's like to work for an organisation, where employees, word soup today, where employees of organisations will report on their experience of working there. So that's a really useful resource for that. But also look at the websites of the organisations. You know, how do they talk to people? How are they focused? What are their values? What's important to them? And do they actually align with yours? Are they values that are important to you? So if you're really person focused, then working in, say, finance might not work for you, because you might not get the one-to-one working with individuals that you would enjoy. So all things to think about when you're applying and looking for jobs, because it's got to be a good fit for you. It's not just about how you fit for the employer. It's got to work for you too. Toby, next slide, please. So we are on to our questions and answers, and we've been doing some as we go through. I just want to skim through and make sure that we haven't missed anyone. But also there are lots of resources on the Hive itself. So there's a list there for you of all of the articles on the Evenbreak Career Hive. So we've got one on asking for feedback, one on the PAR technique, one on the art of CV design, crafting an executive CV for those of you who are a bit further on in your careers, the power of action words, how to craft a standout personal statement for your CV, which includes the profile that, the formula that we showed you earlier, creating ATS friendly CVs, which I would recommend to you. We didn't talk about ATS in this webinar, but ATS is definitely important when it comes to submitting CVs. That's where the bots, as Rosa's been referring to them, will scan a CV even before it gets into human hands and decide if it is or isn't a good match. So they definitely recommend that article.
I mean, you must have a great insight, because actually that's one of the questions in our Q&A. What does an ATS stand for? So Tommy's just expressed that really eloquently, right? It's a computerized bot that takes your CV in, sifts through it, and it makes a decision whether you're going to go to the interview, basically, right, Tommy?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So it's another stage. You have to get through a bot that has no feelings and no emotions to get to that stage. But it's also important to know not everybody uses them, and it's not always easy to tell who uses them. So that's where the tailoring is really important, and to use words from the job description and the person specification so that the bot can recognize that you're a good match, so that a human can look at your story.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting you say that, because I was really surprised, guys, when you hear this. HMRC actually don't use artificial intelligence or bots. They actually go through the process manually, which is really interesting. And they're a huge organization that employs quite a lot of staff. So a lot of companies do, big and small, but, you know, quite a few actually don't as well. Here's some other questions, Tammy, that have been asked. Let me just go to it. Okay, so how can you get feedback, as most nearly all of the companies will not give you feedback due to being scared of getting into trouble for something they have said? And that comes from Lawrence. How would you answer that, Tammy?
I think okay, so a lot of companies won't give you feedback unless you get to the interview stage. If you get to the interview stage, you should be entitled to feedback. If you have only applied, then if they gave feedback on potentially 200 or 300 applications, they'd never get any work done. So a lot of them won't give you feedback at that stage, but then that's what coaching is for. So coaching or advisors, or even your friends and family, can review CVs and applications before you send them in. And it's quite important to make use of all the opportunities you have to talk to a coach, or to talk to anyone who can help with that, because then you know you're getting a really well-rounded CV in as well. So it depends at what level of what you're not getting feedback. So if you're not getting it at the interview stage, that's pretty poor. I don't know that there's really much you can do about it except ask, and if they say no, then ask them to justify why they've said no. But that feedback at the application stage is very rare to get that.
Lawrence is on fire today, Tommy. He's got another question. Guys, I know we've gone over a little bit, so I hope you're all okay to stay on just for another couple of minutes, because we do want to get to everyone's question. Are there any questions that can help people find out what they are good at and what jobs may fit them?
Oh, psychometrics.
That's a whole other different.
Yeah, yes, there are, and no, there aren't. So what I mean by that is there are lots of tools out there. They're called psychometric tools that will help to assess the things that you're good at, the things that you like, and they will give you some suggestions of places to start looking, or things, areas of work to start looking at. But they're all suggestions, so nothing is a prescription. But yes, so the National Career Service has a psychometric tool that will help with that. There's also, and interestingly, it's a Canadian website, but there's a website called Alice, ALIS, that has an assessment like that. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Rosa, but the Prospects website, I think, also has a psychometric tool that will help with that. That's prospects.co.uk. I think it might be prospects.ac.uk. So there are lots of tools out there, but it's really important to use them with the idea that they are starting points of things to explore. So if you do it and they tell you that you're going to be good at being an HGV driver, then it's something to explore. It's not necessarily a prescription that says you're going to be really good at it. It's an opportunity for you to look into HGV driving and see if it's for you. I'm literally just picking it out of the air because it's been in the news lately. But yeah, so they can be helpful, but use them with a pinch of salt. I'd also like to address, actually, there was a question from somebody very early on in the chat, whose question was, what about disabled people? What happens if you have a disability? And actually, certainly everyone who works at Evenbreak has a disability, and I think that most, if not all, people attending the webinar will have a disability. Everything that we've shared with you today is as relevant for you if you're disabled as if you're not. So the bits that we've added are things like talking about career gaps. We would also talk about, if we had time, we'd talk about adjustments and things like that. So the service itself at the Hive is designed for disabled people. We know that bias happens. It would be silly to tell you that it doesn't, but it's sometimes more complex than that. So it's about being really good at telling them what you're good at and asking for the things that you need that will help you perform well at things like interview and in the job. Do we have any other questions? Have I missed anything? Kerry's asked, will the recording be available? Yes, it will. We'll upload that to the Hive as soon as we can. I think there might be a little backlog at the moment, but hopefully that should be up in the next week or so.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have. We think we've answered them all. Is that right, Toby? And I know we've gone over a little bit, just by 5 minutes or so. Tammy and I would like to say a big, huge thank you to everyone for joining. And we've had Lisa, Tammy, who's just said, really great webinar, thank you. I was having a few difficulties with my sound and Wi-Fi, so Tammy was taking over. So I just want to say a big thank you and appreciation to Tammy for supporting. Obviously, we have Toby in the background too, who helps us with all the production of this webinar. And again, to Claire and Karen for supporting us today on our journey. Thank you very, very much. So guys, without further ado, we're going to finish it here. Thanks very much for joining and see you all at the next webinar. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.